can start. Good morning, everyone, again, and thank you for joining us to our seventh event of CLIMAAX Community of Practice. My name is Fulvio Bidau from the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, and today with my colleagues, Majid Niaskar, I will be moderating the event, which is dedicated to mobilizing finance for climate risk assessment and adaptation. And this event is jointly organized with our sister project, Pathway to Resilience, and colleagues and friends from the EU Mission on Adaptation to Climate Change and the Naturans project. So before we start, as usual, a few housekeeping rules. Perfect. So please note that this meeting is being recorded, so feel free to turn off your camera and please keep your mic off during presentation. And we encourage you to post your questions and comments throughout the event using the chat. So you can find at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Or you can also raise your hand to contribute to the discussion during a dedicated time, as we are willing to dedicate the last segment of the event to the discussion and question and answer with our speakers. And these recordings will be available later on, so don't worry if you miss something. So here is the agenda for today's meeting. We have a great lineup of speakers and insightful presentation ahead, and we'll begin with Frederik Spernaveland and Thomas Kutz, coordinators respectively of CLIMAAX and Pathway to Resilience project. And they will kick off the event by presenting how these two flagship projects under the EU Mission on Adaptation are currently supporting and funding regions in their climate resilience journeys. So next we'll hear from two more P2R colleagues, Keith England from Paul Vatkis Associates and Konstantinos Delis from the Athens University of Economics and Business, and they will introduce us with the key resources to help understand and leverage adaptation finance. And then Leslie Barriga from FEDEREN will walk us through the MIP4ADAPT funding database, an important tool for navigating the landscape of available opportunities for regions and local authorities. And finally, we'll close the round of presentation with Jaroslav Miziak, our colleague from CMCC, exploring how to finance risk reduction and the role of insurance in this process. And to conclude, we'll open the floor to Q&A and panel discussion with our speakers to delve deeper into today's topics. Just a quick reminder again to everyone in the audience, you can use the chat to submit your questions at any time, and we'll do our best to address them during the panel discussion. So without further ado, let's begin with our first two speakers who will help us set the stage. First, I'm pleased to introduce Frederik Spernaveland, Scientific Coordinator of the Horizon Europe CLIMAAX project. She holds a PhD from Utrecht University, and her work focused on the impacts of climate change on the largest river of the world. She actually works at the Dutch Knowledge Institute, Deltares, for more than 15 years, and there Frederik was involved in related to the value of ecosystem observation and climate datasets for water resources and climate impact studies. Following EIT Climate Kick, he is responsible for orchestrating the application of system innovation approach for transformations toward climate neutrality and resilience at regional scale. He is currently the coordinator of the Pathways to Resilience project, and Thomas holds a PhD and brings expertise in science policy interface, ecological economics, and environmental management. So I cut here for now and give directly the floor to Frederik for kicking off with their presentation. Thank you again, all our colleagues and friends, for joining us today. And let's start.
Yes, good morning. Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk. I also realize that there are many of you already quite familiar with the CLIMAAX project, so I'll keep it brief for those who are new. CLIMAAX is a 4-year Horizon Europe project, and now I need to be able to. One moment. Yes. Yes, and it's funded, as Fulvio already said, under the Mission Adaptation. We started in 2023 and will run a little bit longer than 2026. There are two key developments. That's the climate risk assessment framework and a toolbox. And this is all developed to support European regions to conduct their own climate risk assessments. And for this, we have a second tool, and that's the cascading funds. And through us, the Mission Adaptation is providing funding to about 69 regions now to conduct their own climate risk assessments. So very brief, this is the climate risk assessment framework. We really work together with a number of pilot regions to make this applicable at the local scale, but also understandable if you want to do your own regional assessments. The framework is available online with a lot of guiding materials, explanations, movies, to really start your own climate risk assessment. You can find it at the handbook.climax.eu. And there you also have a variety of risk workflows for different hazards. So floods, droughts, fire. You can see it here. The handbook has been online since September 24. And since then it has been used by several regions and tested and updated quite regularly. Then we're here with the cascading funds. We have 12 million euros available to fund third parties, and those should be regions or NGOs from Europe and associated countries. There were two calls, and the regions have been selected. So the first batch of regions started in October 2024, and the second batch recently started in March 2025. And the nice thing within this kind of project is that in the end, you yourself, you are responsible for doing your climate risk assessment, and you also receive the funding yourself. Now, having the two open calls at a glance, you can see that in total we have selected 69 regions from 32 different countries. There was a funding of 12 million, and that's divided over two calls. The first one had a little bit more than 6 million of funding. The remainder was spent in the second open call. In total, we received 382 applications. So we also see that there is a huge interest in this kind of funding. And we really had to do a careful selection to, in the end up with 69 regions. And again, you can see on the map on the bottom from which countries the selected regions originate. And we really tried to have it as diverse as possible, covering most of Europe and its outermost regions. Now, thanks to all our partners, because it's a team effort, I would say.
Thank you very much, Frederick, for this nice introduction of CLIMAAX in a nutshell. I really appreciate also the acknowledgement, because this is really a team effort. And so I'll give now the floor to also Thomas to spotlight the Pathway to Resilience, the sister project from CLIMAAX.
Thank you very much. So yeah, my name is Thomas Kurz. I am coordinator or co-coordinator together with Laura Pando, also from CLIMAAX of the P2R project, the Pathway to Resilient project. I will start sharing my screen. Voila. And in presentation mode. And so, yeah, I want to give a bit of an introduction to Pathway to Resilience as such, and then also to our just recently launched second call for applications for regions to take part in Pathways to Resilience. I want to start with laying out the base, which is from within the context of the mission on adaptation, which you have seen that sort of CLIMAAX really provides here the base, the foundation of these three objectives. So CLIMAAX really addresses as one of the two flagships of the Mission Adaptation project with cascading funds. So CLIMAAX is preparing Europe for climate disruptions with the idea to provide these risk assessment frameworks and understanding and the community of practice to actually undertake that, and the conceptual framework to do that. And then P2R settles on top of that and is the main flagship project under the Mission Adaptation, addressing that second objective, which is to design, with the output of designing a vision and innovation pathways and enabling conditions. Here, in a different form or a different way of presenting this, is the mission intervention logic. Again, you see at the bottom, CLIMAAX supporting this task of assessing opportunities and risks, and then Pathway to Resilience, supporting the idea of the next following steps in the logical sequence of sort of transition to climate resilience, as to mobilize partnerships and engagement and formulating the vision and pathways. So this is where P2R sits in the overarching sort of landscape of the mission adaptation. And both of them, so P2R and CLIMAAX as such, provide a large part of the first two parts. And then beyond that, you have sort of the other innovation actions and other activities that sort of take then ideally or principally the idea of testing innovations and testing solutions forward and scaling them up. So maybe more in detail what P2R is about and what it offers. So what it's about, it has three main objectives. And the first one is to support 100 regions and communities in designing or improving their strategies on how to transition to climate resilience, including a description of different pathways with different adaptation options to climate resilience, the formulation of a portfolio of innovation actions underpinning these pathways, and very, very importantly, also the development of a finance and investment plan that underpins these strategies, right? So that you don't only have a strategy at the end of the process of P2R within your region, but also a good idea and finance investment plan of actually following up on that and implementing that. And Kit and Kostas, just following my presentation, will give a bit more insight and what we are doing there. The second important point of P2R is enhancing the capacity and capability of the 100 regions that we work with to continue leading their own transition to climate resilience. So to really capacitate them on their journey to resilience. And lastly, part of the project is also that we test and develop and test and validate a conceptual framework and a support program and capacity building approach that we apply. And we're learning from these 100 regions and communities that we work with to then leave a legacy of a framework and support available online and an approach that maybe be taken beyond the P2R project. Following, so very quickly, some of the key things. We have a framework similar to the CLIMAAX. So we developed an own framework, which is very importantly built on the RAST, on the regional adaptation support tool provided by the EEA, but it's meaning to sort of add to that elements that support the transformational aspects of this development. So thinking beyond more sort of really to go beyond a more sort of incremental approach and think about, okay, if I really want to go to resilience, what do I have to sort of really transform in different stages? The other thing is it's also built, and here you can see also the visual alignment much closer to what the city's mission has developed in terms of its conceptual framework, what they call the transition map to climate net zero. And we are sort of very much in line to where the city's mission is ending up with their city climate contracts, we would be in P2R end up with this the climate resilience strategies, action plans, and finance and investment plans after that third or midterm of this term. What we have developed on top for these first 3 phases is a guidance and framework with a lot of different steps. I'm not going through here the detail. It's just to give you, we have this conceptual framework, and we have very thorough guidance on how to go through and undertake each of these steps. And that was the support as one of the elements of the support we provide for the regions to go through this. One specific feature here I would like to say is that within that first phase, preparing the ground, we also have a task called assessing risk and capabilities. And within that, we are sort of giving guidance on how to assess climate risks. And in this case, we have made a direct link to CLIMAAX, where basically what we are providing there as guidance on how to assess climate risk is building on the work of CLIMAAX. So it's the conceptual framework of CLIMAAX and taking that forward. And so there's a very direct link. So we don't want to repeat and reinvent the wheel, but really build on and make closer relationships there. Another important part is the enabling conditions here on the bottom. That is sort of that we are building capacity on in order to support these developments. There's guidance, as I said. The other thing is a adaptation investment cycle framework that we have developed, and that I only refer to here very briefly because Kit and Costas are explaining that in more detail. But there's a very dedicated plan to support and to move along the framework development or the regional strategy development, underpinning this with the investment planning. Now, also there's lots of guidance and yeah, so one of the things is that the other part that we are developing is the support program, which is not only having these guidance documents, but also a huge amount of capacity building and training. And we have a climate toolbox, an online toolbox that supports for each of the steps and tasks a lot of information of possible tools to be used. We have a peer-to-peer mentoring program. We have innovation practice group where we bring regions together to exchange on their solutions, ideas, and their challenges, etc., etc. And so a whole range of additional support we provide. Now, here's a bit in terms of the structure of the project. So we started in January 23. We are now we have a 5-year project, and we have 2 cohorts, very similar to CLIMAAX. So we have 2 calls. In the first cohort, we have 40 regions that we started with. They started to work with us in October 24. The yellow star shows where we are now in timing. And they work for 18 months. So all of the regions that we work with have an 18 months timeline, and they will finish end of March 26. So we have then, as you can see, then a second cohort that is to start the work in 26. So, and for the second cohort, we have now launched a call for another 60 and 61 regions to be applying or to be selected, so that we will work from the beginning of January 26 to the to mid 27, so end of June, 18 months from that. So the first 40 regions you can see here is nicely scattered across Europe. And so similarly to that, we are now looking for a equally distributed addition of another 60 regions to that, so to get to 100 regions. Now explaining a few words on the new call, which has been launched last week. So this is now a call for, as I said, 61 regions. It's open until the 20th of August, noon. And you can register under this link. There's also further information sessions planned. One is today, but there will be others following. What P2R offers, in a nutshell, I said it before, is on the one hand, guidance and tools, the support program, and similar to CLIMAAX, also financial support, say sub-granting. In more concrete details, in numbers, this is 210,000 euros for each of the sub-grantees over a length or duration of our support of 18 months. And the main selection criteria are most vulnerable regions with high climate risk and low adaptive capacity and diversity. So we really want to have a diverse range of regions representing different countries, bioregions, climate risk types, scales, etc. And so, yeah, applicants must select a specific scope of where they will apply their regional resilience, that being sort of NUTS 1, NUTS 2, 3, or local administrative units, or whatever is equivalent to your eligible country. There's no strict it is quite open and flexible in terms of the range of territorial sort of boundaries. But within this context, you can choose and define your scope. I leave it at this and want to make once more the reference to the point that there is a strong link between CLIMAAX and P2R. There is a logical sequence that it would be it is very preferential and helpful if regions have done first a thorough climate risk assessment. And once they have done that, they would be much better able to engage in the work of Pathway to Resilience. And this is hence I would like to use this platform here to encourage all those regions that have been or are undergoing a process in CLIMAAX or using CLIMAAX as inspiration to do that parallel next or to CLIMAAX, to feel inspired and motivated to apply to P2R, as we think then P2R would really fall on very fruitful grounds to be taking you to the next level of transformation planning to climate resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Thomas, for this nice introduction and for the announcement of the open call, but also I want to thank you for acknowledging the overall complementarity of CLIMAAX and Pathway to Resilience and how each other builds from other knowledge and instruments developed within these two projects. So regions could really leverage all these resources, and we are all taking thoughts from each other. So thank you for clarifying and stressing this point, and we encourage all the regions that have already applied or not to CLIMAAX to apply for the second open call, not for overwhelming you with further work, but we need to accomplish that mission in supporting and funding regions. So I think that now we can move on because we have a great lineup of speakers and packed with presentations for you. I remind you just to share your comments, or if you have questions using our chat, we'll try to address them later on. So now we can move on to the next part of today's webinar. We aim to provide you with further insights and resources for navigating the adaptation finance landscape. And in this session, we'll hear from 4 experts sharing key insights, tools, and resources. This contribution will help us better understand the financial landscape for supporting climate risk assessment and resilience building in region. So I introduce our speakers and panelists joining today's session. So first of all, we have Keith England. He's a senior climate adaptation specialist at Paul Vatkiss Associates with over 15 years of experience across public, private, and third sector. He's a leading expert in place-based adaptation planning, finance, and climate justice, and has led a major initiatives such as Climate Ready Tide, this Scotland's largest place-based partnership on adaptation. He also lead the climate finance workstream for Adaptation Scotland at Paul Vatkiss Associate, and is currently leading a portfolio of adaptation planning, finance, and economic projects. So we have also another colleague from P2R, Konstantinos Telis, is a postdoctoral researcher at the Athens University of Economics and Business, and he colleagues with Keith the finance package in the Horizon project Pathway to Resilience. He has an extensive economic background in econometrics, but also developmental economics and regional resilience. We have also Leslie Barriga, who is a Peruvian geographer with a master in sustainability. She has worked across sectors, including international organizations, academia, and the private sectors, in environmental projects related to risk reduction, water, climate, and energy. And today she will introduce us the MIP for Adaptation Funding Database, which is a valuable tool for regions seeking financial resources. Lastly, we have Yaroslav Miziak, a colleague from CMCC. He is a principal scientist formerly leading the risk assessment and adaptation strategy division, and he is, among others, the technical expert group members of the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction and UNFCCC, and also the European Environment Agency. So without further ado, Keith and Kostas, the floor is yours, and thanks again for joining us today. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Brilliant. Okay, so thanks, Fulvio. That's really, really helpful. And I will just put up our presentation. So let's just have a quick check for that. Yeah, does that come up? Can you see that? Okay.
I'm still waiting for your presentation to appear. I don't know if others can see. Yeah, now it's good.
We're there now. Great. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, good morning, everyone. Really lovely to be with you this morning. Thanks ever so much for the opportunity. So I'm going to just sort of run through the slides this morning. So we're going to talk a little bit about understanding adaptation finance and sort of the process that we're using in Pathways to Resilience and some of the instruments that we can use as well. So I think it's worth just starting with a little bit of context. So we know through risk assessments, particularly the UCRA, but also the risk assessments that are being delivered through CLIMAAX as well, that it's becoming increasingly urgent to tackle adaptation. And we have that increased focus on subnational adaptation through the EU Mission on Adaptation. And we also know the costs of adaptation are potentially quite large. So there was a report from the World Bank and the European Commission that came out last year and had the sort of first estimates of the near-term adaptation needs, the costs of near-term adaptation needs. And that put the cost for Europe at between 15 and 64 billion euros a year until the 2030s. So, and we know that cost will rise in future. So that's just the near term. And as risks rise, obviously the costs will rise as well. And in Pathways to Resilience, in some of the sort of early work that we did, we tried to have a look at how much money is currently flowing, because it's not very well tracked in Europe. And we had a look at the CDP data that cities report. And we think that shows about 8.5 billion a year is going into European cities. So that's the sort of little Sankey diagram on the bottom right. So that would suggest a gap of sort of between 7 and 56 billion euros a year. And we think that data is over optimistic. There are lots of data quality issues in what's reported through CDP. But typically what we are seeing is that mostly at the moment, regions are using public funds for adaptation. So lots of grants, lots of different EU funding streams, but many territories sort of struggle to mobilize wider finance and resource. And that's really due to barriers, but also limited fiscal space as well. And so the work that we're doing with Pathways to Resilience, developing these climate resilience investment plans, intend to try and bridge that gap. And it's not something that's just happening in Pathways to Resilience, but it's becoming a global issue. So lots of countries now are starting to develop adaptation investment plans too. But before we jump into that, I think it's worth just talking a little bit about what's stopping more work happening on adaptation finance, or why is it hard to finance? And I think it's worth talking about is we talk about 3 different types of barriers. So there are barriers due to sort of the characteristics of adaptation, and we'll touch on those in a minute. But then we also have practical barriers, so things like availability of resources and staff time. And then we also have procedural. So the work that we've been doing in Pathways to Resilience is designed to kind of address those sets of barriers together. So the first type of barriers are those are sort of arising due to the characteristics of adaptation, and we show a sort of picture of that on the right. So lots of finances is difficult for finance to flow because there's a lot of uncertainty. So whereas in other sectors you kind of invest for one possible future, or you look at one possible future, we have lots of uncertainty about how much warming is going to happen, and therefore lots of kind of considerations about whether you overinvest or underinvest. There are also issues around the financing, or the revenue streams that come from adaptation. So it's very hard to get revenue streams to pay back money, and also they take place over a very long time horizon. There are also what we call market failures or public good characteristics. So it's very hard to capture the value from adaptation. And then we also know that adaptation is very context specific and projects are quite small, which means that they're very difficult to draw together and aggregate and get economies of scale. So there are some really practical barriers that mean that, or really challenging barriers that make it difficult as an activity to finance. There are also practical barriers, as we say, so things like availability of resources, staff time, skills, etc. And the cascade funding from P2R is really designed to address that. And then we have these procedural barriers as well, which is that finance is often left until after the adaptation planning is complete. So just to say a little bit more about that, when we did our review of adaptation processes, or adaptation finance processes to inform P2R's cycle, we generally found that there was this very typical linear approach. And I, having been in a public authority and gone around a number of adaptation planning cycles, I can definitely identify with this. So you work out what your risks are, you plan your adaptation responses, and then you're sort of encouraged to think about how do I pay for them afterwards. And that's difficult because so economics and finance then in the adaptation cycles, in the traditional ones, are really relegated towards the end of the process. So they're used for appraising options, or they're used for kind of thinking about the bankability at the end. And actually what we've learned is that you really need to think about it throughout. So even right at the start, when you're thinking about the sectors, thinking about the roles of, say, the public sector, households, and firms, for example, and the mix of who pays for adaptation can be really, really helpful. Or using the costs of climate change and the costs of inaction and the costs of historic weather events can be really helpful in convincing people in the case for action and things like that. So what we're trying to do is makes financing and economics a much more central consideration in the adaptation planning and the delivery. And that helps to maximize kind of participation of new actors. So you can sort of see on the right, we're still working on this diagram throughout the project really, but we're saying that if you really want a climate resilience strategy that you can fund, it has to consider not just adaptation goals, but it has to think about the wider development and policy goals for the regions, who pays, whether it delivers good value for money for a public institution, and whether they're really financially viable as well. So Thomas showed you this already, so I'll not say so much, but yeah, what we're trying to do, we have this 6-step adaptation or 6-phase adaptation investment cycle, and this is conducted in parallel to the main adaptation planning process. So, regions who are following the process in Pathways to Resilience are kind of thinking about these phases and these tasks as they also think about their preparing the ground around building their shared visions and designing their pathways as well. So, as I've briefly mentioned, we sort of have economics and finance considerations built throughout, and it's also supported by enabling conditions for adaptation finance. And it's worth just pausing and saying something about that, because in the mission we talk about enabling conditions for adaptation, but increasingly the literature also talks about enabling conditions for finance. So if you really want to mobilize finance, you have to have the right policies in place, you have to have the right governance in place, you might need incentives, you might need regulations. So we really are starting, we'll be saying more about this in the sort of second iteration of our guidance, but that kind of those enabling conditions for finance itself is also really important. So we have while the cycle is a 6-phase, the actual development of the investment plans is over 4 phases, and each phase has 3 tasks. So you can sort of see this diagram at the top, which shows you the 4 different phases and the tasks underneath. And what we have also tried to recognize is that regions are at different stages of their competence and capability on financing, and so some steps are really essential, some steps are really essential but a bit more complicated, and some should be optional as well. So so there are some things which regions could do and kind of don't have to, but we think that all of them will support the development of the investment plan as well. So climate resilience investment plans are this key economic and financial planning tool to mobilize investment and adaptation. So ideally, they become these publicly available documents, and what they do is they translate a high-level vision and pathways through to bankable investments. And so in general, they are a lot more detailed than a traditional adaptation strategy for what they're planning to do, and they have these 3 components in them. So high-level investment strategies for the adaptation pathways. So these think about the different roles of different actors. So whether it's businesses, whether it's households and consumers and citizens, or government, and what are their roles? What about which sources and instruments, which sources of finance are you going to try and mobilize, and which instruments you're going to use? And then we have these action plans, which are the sort of near-term things you're going to do over the next 5 years, as well as a pipeline of future projects. And then we have a sort of an action plan which looks to improve the enabling environment as well. And so these documents, when they're finished, will be key for engaging the private sector and also attracting major financial players as well. And so we have these kind of 8 characteristics for investment plans as well, which we set out in the guidance, which you can just sort of see there on the right as well. So I'm not going to run through those now. So so why develop one? It's a very good question. You know, we are sort of running it as a standalone process, but it's perfectly possible to use this process to think about financing within a strategy or an adaptation strategy or plan too. But there are some really good reasons that we think it's worth doing. So the sort of the shift from a project by project approach to financing to a much more strategic approach opens up a lot of new financing possibilities. So it helps you think about diversifying your sources and instruments, and also thinking about developing more innovative financing approaches for particular projects where you need to. But it also helps maximize public sector value for money. So it helps you know in a region that you are spending money wisely and that they offer good economic benefits for society overall. But it also helps you work out what you need to do now and what you can leave and do later. And that's really helpful because we know that regional territories have limited public budgets. Similarly, private sector corporations have their business planning cycles as well. So it helps you think through what to do now and what to do later. And I think one of the things that's really valuable is that it considers the perspectives of private finance and real economy actors to show where private funding is really viable, because there's a lot of noise around the fact that we need the private sector to really pay for more adaptation. And in some cases, that is definitely possible. And in others, it's really, really difficult. And I think there's a lot of noise, but not much real action. And it's going to be very difficult. So working through the process really helps you work out which ones are realistic prospects where you could ask others to do more. And then it also identifies where new policies, regulations, or incentives are needed to accelerate progress. So in some cases, it may be difficult for regions to take action without, say, national reform or EU level progress. So that will be helpful. It also increases the visibility of investment needs and opportunities, and it's also a really important part of knowledge and capacity building as well. Running a process, there's nothing like trying to do a process to build your knowledge and capacity on how to finance adaptation. So we're aware that that's really challenging. So we have a big capacity building program designed to meet regions where they are. So we have a range of different formats here. So we have a kind of 2.5-day structured training program on the adaptation investment cycle, but we also have a sort of range of ways to learn at your own pace. We have guidance and drop-ins. We have a sort of a learn by doing approach with some one-to-one support, innovation practice groups, some peer-led mentoring and a lab. And we're also going to be doing some further work on tools over the project as well. So I would really encourage you to have a look at this. This is our finance guidance that we've produced, and this has really in-depth guidance and detail on how to undertake each of the tasks within the adaptation investment cycle. It has information on kind of inputs and who to involve and kind of practical activities you can do, as well as sort of case studies and further reading as well. And it's free to download from the P2R website, and it's there now. But just briefly towards the end, one of the big tools we've been working on in Pathways to Resilience is a catalogue of sources and instruments and best practice processes for finance. So I said a little bit earlier that diversifying sources and instruments is a key priority. And most regions typically rely on public budgets and EU funds. So you can sort of have a look here. This diagram is from a survey the Commission did on the mission signatories about what sources of financing do people use. And as you can see, there's a big concentration around public funds and much less on private sector. So there are. But although that kind of regions are focusing on public funds, there are lots of different sources and instruments that you could theoretically use for adaptation. And actually what we're starting to see now is that there are a really good set of case studies, which not just from in Europe, but broadly all over the world, which are crowding in a lot of different actors to pay for adaptation, which is really great.
So Kit, to interrupt you, if you could, let's say, try to summarize, because we are running out of time and it's really relevant, but
that's fine. We'll finish here. So it's we have a very big catalogue. It has a lot of different sources and instruments, and it's available to download on the Pathways to Resilience website. So I would really encourage you to have a look. There we go. And that was the last slide. So we're done. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kit. Sorry to interrupt. It's really insightful and guidance that really can support regions. Also, these results are available, so we are going to share it with our community. And thanks also for stressing the points of strategically integrated investment planning into the adaptation planning when starting with it. So that said, sorry again, but I give you the floor now to Leslie to introduce another key resources from MIP4ADAPT, the MIP4ADAPT Funding Adaptation database.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be part of this panel and sharing this experience with the people with such long trajectory on the climate action in Europe. As Fulvio said, my name is Leslie Barriga. I am project officer at FEDAHEN, which is the European Federation of Regions and Agencies on Energy and Environment. And this association is part of the consortium managing MIP4ADAPT, or the Mission Implementation Platform. So today, I'm gonna introduce you the MIP4ADAPT funding database, which is a practical resource that can help regional, or well, we hope it can help regional and local stakeholders take these first steps towards financing their climate adaptation efforts. Next slide, please. Perfect. So to start, just a brief introduction on what's MIP4ADAPT. So MIP4ADAPT, as I said, is a mission implementation platform that supports the EU mission on adaptation to climate change on the achievement on its goals. So it's basically the practical arm of the mission, or the operational platform of the mission. While the mission tells us what needs to be done and why. MIFRADA focuses on how to do it. So this platform offers tools, data, guidance, and resources to regional and local authorities to take real action on the ground. So among those tools is the funding database that we will be presenting today, which is key part of MIFRADA's work to make adaptation more accessible, more coordinated, and more effective. Next slide, please. Great. So now going deep in what's the funding database. So the purpose of this database is basically to support regional and local authorities in identifying funding opportunities for climate adaptation. Important to say it's that while the primary audience is public authorities, this database is also very valuable, a valuable resource for businesses, NGOs, and research institutions that often partner in these adaptation projects. It brings together information on funding sources from EU institutions, national governments, and agencies. So it's not just the funding itself, but also the organizations that issue these funds. Another important clarification, this isn't a list of live calls or active calls. Instead of this, it offers a broader overview of funding programs and issuing entities, which can help the users understand a bit of the landscape and get ready for upcoming opportunities. And finally, to say it's that this database doesn't include funding. It's in the, yes. So this database doesn't include funding that is strictly labeled for adaptation. It also covers related areas like climate mitigation, transport, and digital innovation, for example, because many of these funding streams can be relevant depending on how your project is framed. So that is why it's very important to look at the broader climate objectives behind each funding source, because many of them are flexible enough to support cross-cutting initiatives that advance more than one climate target at a time. Yeah, all in all, this is a starting point, a tool to help you see what's out there, align your project ideas with relevant programs, and plan your next steps strategically. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. So when the user starts navigating the database, he or she will be able to filter the programs based on these 5 categories. First of all, the countries where the funding is offered. Second, the geographical scope, if we're talking about EU-wide funding programs or national or cross-border programs. Third, the adaptation sectors, which are the specific areas relevant to your project, like agriculture, water management, whether we're talking about ecosystem restoration, marine and fisheries, etc. Then we have target groups to identify funding opportunities tailored to the user's type, being this public authority, an NGO, a private company, and so on and so forth. And finally, the last step of relevance, which has been mentioned in previous presentations. So the alignment with the specific step in the risk assessment and adaptation support tool, which is a comprehensive framework developed to assist local and regional authorities in formulating and implementing climate adaptation strategies. Next slide, please. So here we have just an example on, I took a screenshot on an example of an EU fund program. On the column on your right shows the filtering options, and the column of your left shows basically some basic information that you will find in all the programs. We're starting with the objective of the funding program. Here we're trying to highlight also the relevance for adaptation purposes. As we said, that there are some funds, like for example the digital program, that at first glance doesn't look like it's related or relevant to adaptation, but then when you deep inside, it can actually support adaptation efforts. Then also, things usually people try to focus on the first part of the page and not scroll down. We also try to fill in with the most important information, as also the links on how to apply to the program, the calls or the possible calls in the future, and also the details of the national contact points or points of reference to find further assistance and guidance. And then we also have some further information of type of funding, funding rates, expected budget, and so on and so forth that you can check. Next slide, please. Well, this is basically just the same, but of an example for a national fund. So I'm gonna try to skip it. Next slide, please. So for more information, if when navigating the database, you need some further clarifications, as I said, the users should reach out to the national contact points or designated reference contacts, which are highlighted in the program objectives showed before. So these contact points will provide you tailored advice, clarify eligibility criteria, and assist also in aligning your project with the program objectives and overall to enhance the quality of your project ideas or project proposals. And also as P2R, for the beginners in the funding and financial world, I do encourage you to also explore our guide, our funding and financing guide, which is a resource for your planning and implementation work. So this guide offers a comprehensive overview of financial mechanisms available for climate adaptation projects. And likewise, it will give you some the general approach on how to build a strong case for action. Next slide, please. So to wrap up, I would like to highlight that the MIFRADAP funding and database offers a comprehensive overview of available financial and funding support for climate adaptation. We have around more than 300 programs listed between EU funds and national funds. So this, and also something to highlight is that it is currently being updated. And so if whenever you are starting to navigate and you see some things that are still not updated, please bear with us. We're in this process where we're a team that is collecting all of the information from the different sources and countries. And yeah, finally, the database particularly is useful for regional local stakeholders as it aligns their local strategies with national or EU level priorities and building well-prepared project ideas and to act on opportunities as they come up. Next slide, please. And as I know that this presentation will be shared, I just add all the direct access to first the funding and financing database, then the first page for searching the EU or national funding opportunities, and if you want to explore more on the Horizon Europe, also you have the direct link. And that will be it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And also we will make sure to share all these resources you shared and also from P2R to our community. So for the sake of time, I will now give directly the floor to our colleague Jaroslav Misiak. But be sure we will send a comprehensive email with all the information from this meeting and all the resources that were discussed and shared today. Thanks again, Leslie. Back to you, Jaro.
Thank you very much, Fulvio, and good morning to everybody. Thank you for the speakers before. It was incredibly rich and incredibly comprehensive overview of the finance. So I have shortened my slide and I will jump directly to the risk financing instruments, and just to connect that to the talks of my colleagues on the panel. Kate and Leslie have spoken about mostly about equity or lending or credit instruments. You get certain investment sources and invested into increasing your resilience. But there are plenty of other ways how to realign the finance, and those are basically based on the current environmental taxes, payment, pricing instrument, trading instrument, and so on. So there is a scope within the mission adaptation to realign the flow of finance in order to serve the scope of increasing the resilience. And this is the scope that I will be exploiting in my presentation. I will be referring to the risk-based instruments. And typical form is the insurance, but it's not only insurance, there are also water tariffs with risk pricing and so on. But insurance is probably the most commonly known, and there's a program of the European Union. The European regulator, IOPA, is looking into how to harness the insurance for the adaptation and disaster risk reduction. And in the project that I'm leading, the Nature for Insurance and Insurance for Nature, we are exploring the link of how to combine the insurance with nature restoration and nature-based solutions. So those are basically, this is the frame that I will be talking about, and I will invite you to be part of this. So risk-based instruments have the potential of tackling two challenges at the same time. Yeah, so you protect your property, you protect your community, and you also invest into risk reduction or nature restoration. And this is desperately needed. So there's a biodiversity finance gap is huge in the same way as the adaptation gap. The Naturance has coined the term of nature-based insurance and investment solutions. They are interesting instruments. They are already in place. There are a number of already existing instruments that insure the nature asset. And that's, for example, the Mesoamerican Reef Insurance Program. It's probably the most well-known. So after a tropical cyclone hits an area, the insurance pays for coral reef restoration rather than compensating the damage on the property on the coast. And this is because the ecosystem service is able to reduce the damage on the coast. So there's a common interest among those property holders and communities to restore very quickly the ecosystem services. But there are a number of other ways how to include the nature restoration. It might also be the traditional insurance contract, right? Rewarding you for something that you have done in order to reduce the individual or collective type of damage and exposure. So you are all very familiar with nature-based solution and the ecosystem services. We have been talking about that already in earlier CoP meetings of CLIMAAX project. This is just a refreshment. There are a number of services that ecosystem provides in terms of regulatory services, livelihood, and so on. And it helps to keep the ecosystem resilient and able to deliver the contribution to the people and to the society. And you see on the slide the number of resources that we can build upon, right? Many of them are reducing the current level of risk, and they might be implemented at the property level, right? You might implement green roof, rain garden, permeable pavements, and so on. That reduces the surface runoff, and that eventually reduces the flood peak and reduces the damage. But some intervention, in order to be efficient, they require neighborhood dimension, right? There's a coordinated installment of implementation of nature-based solution so that you achieve a certain critical mass on the service delivery, and then you are able to reduce the risk or build the resilience. Other instruments really looked into the down and up and downstream relationship in the river basin. So you really need to invest upstream in order to have the benefits downstream. And this is basically creating some interesting condition for insurance, how it might work and how to intervene. So starting from that insurance is a source for finance, both for adaptation and nature restoration. Ecosystem services have an economic value, but they are rarely tapped into, or the basically there's no price paid for the ecosystem services, so they do not, the finance typically don't take this into account, and they are not accounted for and planned for. So this is something to intervene as a part of your innovation at the regional or national scale, innovating into the current flow of environmental and adaptation finance. You might tap into this potential and internalize that. We have done a lot of studies in Nature and Alva demonstrating how the nature-based solution reduce basically the expected annual damage and losses. So in this graph, you see how the climate change is changing the exceedance curve. That is basically how we model the disaster damage and losses to the property, to the society. Climate change is intensifying the water cycle, leading to more frequent or intense events somewhere around the globe and in Europe. And this is increasing the cost of climate extremes. This is the left side of the figure. The red area is the marginal value caused or attributed to the climate change. And on the right side, you see the area of the risk that might be reduced or might be completely eliminated by investing into nature restoration. And that's the green area that you see. So that's typically referring to frequent and not very intense events, because the type of events that we have seen in Spain last year, this is not preventable by any ecosystem service, but the more frequent type of extremes can be prevented or reduced. And this is what we call greenium, right? This is basically a term in finance that describes how nature can reduce, for example, in insurance premium, how you can reduce the cost of commercial or public insurance in order to incentivize the nature restoration. So typically, when we look at the risk instrument, we are starting from the situation in many countries around Europe. There is no insurance, and no insurance available, affordable, or accessible for the communities. So there's a huge potential to innovate, introduce a public partner, private partnership, or a different form of insurance that is affordable and able to protect the society. Because if we don't do that, basically the risk is capitalized in the property values, and that leads to gentrification and other social inequalities. The second situation where we have the insurance in place, we can intervene in certain way how to make it more green. But typically the commercial insurance does not provide any incentive for you to reduce the individual exposure or to reduce the expected damage. So the model that we are investigating is how to harness the value of nature restoration and nature-based solution and make the insurance coverage more sustainable, affordable, and less costly for those that subscribe to that. And there are a number of ways how we investigate that. I have just one example, right? We have a risk of flooding that we investigated in UK, in Italy, in the Netherlands. And flood risk has also, through the link through the property value, has the potential to reach the systemic level. This is what we explored also in the European climate risk assessment. I mean, if you have your mortgage loans and the flood risk is capitalized in the value of your house, then you are paying for something that has lower value than for what you have initially bought it. So aggregated across regions, across nation, that might create a condition that you really are in trouble. So you might create mortgage financial bubbles, and the implication of these we have seen before. So how insurance can be used and harnessed for these type of risk. So we have typically agriculture, rural land that is low value. It's incredibly important for social life and livelihood and so on. But what we draw from that land is a little bit less than the city and urban area. So how to use the rural area to reduce the risk? In Italy, for example, we have the water boards. They have the function of land reclamation, but also flood risk protection. And in some occasions, they are really managing the artificial water bodies that divert the water from the land and convey that to the flood. In certain cases, either you build the infrastructure or you might invest in a controlled flooding. So you let the water out in certain areas that might be less costly to compensate for compared to the downstream middle-sized cities. So that would be the first, right? The intervention. You are tapping into the potential of reducing the damage by controlled flooding. But the more interesting way would be even to turn part of that land into restored wetlands and ecosystem that provide additional benefits. And insurance can provide an incentive to do that. Wrapping up, so we have the insurance is looking into these and similar business innovation cases, and it looks into how the investment might be steered and how the regional reform can look into and tap into the financial flows that might eventually be redirected to make it more useful. And we're doing that by combining the communities across the globe, especially in Europe, financial experts with city networks, with nature-based solution advocacy groups, and risk experts, and so on. And what we are doing as a part of our work is to creating a sort of pre-standard of nature-based insurance and investment solutions. This is the SEN workshop agreement, and we have just launched the process of CWA, how it's called, and you might be part of it, a part of, exploring together with us how this might work in your constituency. I think this is my last slide. This CWA is something that will be developed until March next year, that will be building upon consultation, involving you, inviting everybody else to discuss together with us what needs to be paid attention to and how to make similar innovation for you accessible and implementable. And the culmination of this process will be the Festival of Financial Innovation that we are organizing in Brussels in February next year, and you are kindly invited to this. A part of that, we are also creating a nice visuals and simple explanation how similar schemes can work. So if you are interested in working with us, reach out to us. On the right side, you see our link, and we look forward to briefing you more as this process developed over the next months. And with that, thank you very much, and back to you, Fulvio.
Thank you very much, Yaro. I think we can now move on to the next part of the session, and this is about Q&A and panel discussion with our speakers. I can see also that there are a few questions for maybe you, Yaro, already in the chat, and then we open to the rest of our speaker. So first of all, there is a question on how does the restoration of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem fit into climate change adaptation, and how can they be financially sustainable? So I think this is directed to you, Yaro, but also other colleagues here present.
I can start with that, but probably Kit and Leslie will also have plenty of examples. So
this is my question, and I would like also the Kit England give the answer, especially for the sustainable of financial.
So very briefly, I can start. And it's about, is there an investment upfront, where the investment comes from, and who pays in order to give back the money? So there's a whole innovation case you might explore. If you need externally funded investment upfront, you might look into the sources that Kit and Leslie introduced. It might be European Investment Bank and so on. If you are looking into how to pay back the initial loan or the credit, then you might use the insurance as well. You might look into green bonds, resilience bond, thematic bonds of any kind. You might look into adding, the water tariffs, if you are increasing water security, depending on what kind of nature restoration, what is the final goal, and how to repay the initial goal. So this is complex. It's not just the source of finance, right? This would be my key response. It's definitely important to know where you can take the credit from, but it's equally important, even more important, to figure out how you are going to repay for that. So who is going to pay, and this is based on how you who is benefiting and how you distribute the benefit sharing. Over to you, Kit and Leslie.
I don't know. Do you want to go first, Leslie? Or okay. I mean, it's a good question, isn't it? I guess there's almost two levels that you have to look at, really. I think the first is that if you have a particular project and kind of you're trying to deliver it now, then there are some, I think you're absolutely right, Yarrow. Where are the sources that are around? What are the particular mechanics that can be used now? I think there is a broader question, though, about more generally that if we want a lot of these financial models to work, then there has to be some really big systemic reform as well. So, if we think about insurance, for example, there are lots of, or nature-based solutions, there are lots of coordination barriers. So, actually getting that to work in practice can be really tricky because lots of different organizations have to work together, or because for insurance, for example, you can incentivize things in insurance, but then people change their insurance provider a year later because there's a marketplace. So, I think what we have to do is you almost have to look at the project and see, what can you innovate around the project and the way it works now. But then we also need to have those deeper discussions too. I think, if you look at some of the Mexico reef, for example, is very specific. So I think it's a great example and where people have been really innovative, but the development costs are also really high. That's the other thing. It requires a huge amount of effort. So I'm not trying to be negative. I think what I'm saying is that they're great innovations, and then what we need is to scale them and restructure the system as well to make sure that we see more of them and it's more common as well.
Leslie, do you want to add something?
Yeah, well, only to add that for further clarifications, always on the sources and the opportunities available, it's always good to go to the national contact points and the points of references. They will be able to give you some clarity on whether which would be the best type of grant, loan, or scheme, generally for the purposes of your adaptation initiative. But yeah, that will be my addition. Thank you.
So the next question from the audience is, where does modeling capabilities and modeled and observed data resources stand for nature-based solution assessment? Yarrow, you want to
Yeah, I
address?
can take it. Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Arno Bav. So I put it at some stage on the slide. We have done the global review of how the nature-based solution perform in terms of risk reduction. We've done more than one of global reviews, also focused on how cost efficient and are those investments. And we found out that basically there's a huge evidence about how they perform, where they perform, and they are all, or most of it, bulk of it, bulk of the papers that we reviewed have demonstrated that there is a positive economic return of the nature restoration in terms of disaster risk reduction. There was no paper claiming otherwise. There were few papers that have not answered all our questions and provided less evidence and less reliable evidence. But basically, bulk of the papers have agreed that investing into nature is has a economic rationale also in risk reduction. Now, the point is interesting that mostly when you talk with institutional investor or financial brokers and so on, they tell you this this is a little bit challenging, not because of the lack of evidence, right? You really need to demonstrate that the intervention that you are going to finance works in your specific conditions and so on. But it's challenging because of the low investment. So they are looking into investing billions, and the projects that you are proposing might be, you know, 1 million, 2 million, 5 million. So it's basically mismatch between the appetite in investing into huge nature restoration project and the individual project, what they can deliver, what they need. And these might be changed by other type of interesting institutional reforms. There's an interesting idea that is looking into creating a natural asset company. So imagine you have a traded company on the stock market, and you invest in that, and you observe how your shares change their price, and hopefully you are earning money on that. Now imagine that this company is basically providing restoration of ecosystem services. So there's a certain development into how to bundle the individual investment projects into larger opportunities to invest and overcome this barrier of, you know, being too small for the institutional investor to be interested.
Kit, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think there's one point I was going to make is that I think there's an interesting potential role for someone like the European Investment Bank here, because one of the things that we don't do very much of in Europe is blended finance. You know, and actually for a lot of these types of schemes, you know, the EIB could be really helpful, except that it's sort of sometimes they're limited by the size of the projects that they lend on or those kinds of things. But it's something that, you know, in developing country contexts happens a lot. You know, so you see lots of the, whether it's the UNFCCC and the Adaptation Fund or the Green Climate Fund, kind of providing the kind of grant funding or concessional finance that helps make these things really work in a way that, you know, doesn't necessarily that unlocks a lot of this, is what I'm trying to say, that can kind of crowd in the private sector to come in, even if it's not necessarily the right size. So I think, as well as the innovation in the sort of the underlying modeling and the concepts, we also need the innovation from the institutions to help make these things possible.
Good point. Yaro,
Yeah, just to
want
add, yeah, indeed, European Investment Bank has a program for investing in nature-based solution. It's a green facility, nature-based facility. And what I wanted to say is that in a couple of weeks or 1 week, the European Commission will release the European Water Resilience Strategy, and it envisages that the EIB will expand the program to cover even more interesting projects meant to keep the water in the landscape, right? Retaining the water in the landscape and store it somewhere. So look out for that. And you know, one of the next community of practice might be dedicated to water resilience strategy and what it means for you as you are conducting risk assessment or planning the adaptation strategies. But you know, the Commission is going to expand the EIB operation in that area.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have time for one or more question. Since there is no other question in the chat box, I would like to ask one question from maybe region side. From your experience with open calls that one we have, for example, from P2R, what criteria makes regional proposal strong to get funding? Thomas, do you want to take that one?
Yes, that's a tricky or a very easy answer. I mean, it needs to be a very compelling application that meets all the criteria of what we need. So it needs to be eligible in terms of the region needs to be eligible in terms of where it comes from. That's a broad range. It needs to be eligible in terms of what it proposes to do, and the suggestions for how much how the spending is planned for the 201,000 euros. And then at the same time, we are looking forward to application that meet sort of the ambition of actually having, thinking in terms of transformative resilience. So really sort of thinking, how can we as a region, as a whole, across various sectors and across various elements and parts and community systems, as introduced by the Mission Adaptation, how can we sort of systematically all transform this and think this through? And so this all comes together. Plus, and that, as I mentioned before, there is some selection criteria based on the vulnerability and sort of the need of a region, and these ones are based on existing data and existing categories, first and foremost from the JRC and from ESPN, to really see sort of how much exposure a certain region has. But yeah, I don't know if that gives enough answer, but I mean, it's really a broad spectrum. And the other thing is maybe to mention also, you don't have to be, also very advanced and front-running regions are invited to apply. It's not an exclusionary criteria if you have already a strategy or a plan, but you want to really improve it with a mindset of like a transformational approach. So that would be just as much considered as a good application as a region that really has very is at the early stages of its process to think about these things. So yeah.
Thank you, Thomas.
Not even more
good
precise,
point.
but it's the more the merrier in terms of application, and then the rest is also to an evaluation process.
No, thank you. It's very nice that you also address that, which so advanced regions can also apply, for example, for P2R calls. Leslie, do you want to add something?
Yes. So I totally agree with Thomas. When a strong proposal, and I think it typically it includes like a clear problem definition based on evidence. So for this, you need to have real and reliable data and metrics. You need to have well articulated also climate adaptation measures. But I also think a strong proposal should include, and you should have strong partnerships. You should have a consortium, a strong consortium that showcase all the expertise that you need to have when implementing the adaptation initiative.
Yeah, that's true. Just to clarify, so I mean, fully agree. What that means in the context of P2R is, P2R is supporting a process of planning, right? So it's the process of within the region getting to a resilience strategy and action plan and investment plan, but it's not the implementation of that itself. So having said that, you nevertheless need a good consortium to get through this planning in a very, very considered and sort of way, including lots of different actors and stakeholders. So fully support that. Just to clarify that we are not into implementation, because that's often confused. We are into the strategizing phase still.
Okay, great. I think it is very useful for regions to understand. So building upon your answers, I would like to also come back to the fact that
I think there is Yaro also who raised.
Yaro, you want to add something?
Yeah, it was not so important, but yeah, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Thomas and I had the privilege to be part of the team, the expert group that have designed the mission adaptation. And at that time, we really thought about the strong commitment, local commitment for the change, right? I said, if it's a genuine proposal where you come together, bring the team together and make something which is really feasible but ambitious, then you are probably on the right track to get the funding, the cascading funds.
Thank
Can
you.
I add to that, because that's a point I think beautifully linking to something that I forgot to say or would like to highlight here. And this commitment can show, for example, if your region is already invested in other mission adaptation projects, or mission adaptation projects, or mission adaptation related projects, right? So that is not, again, it's not an exclusionary criteria if you're already involved in some innovation activities or innovation actions or in CLIMAAX. Although, on the contrary, I think there's, as Jaroslav outlined, it's the commitment is really, and the only way to really go through the process of becoming a resilient, like transition to resilience of a region, is how we think a whole multitude, a portfolio of various different projects coming together in a region. So having said that, is again, it's not an exclusionary criteria if you're already involved in other regions. All the contrary, it shows that you're committed, and that's the key. What P2R in this context really can add is to better bring all these things together in a coherent direction and strategy and financing planning.
Thank you, Thomas. I think you explain it very brightly and give us like a clear mindset about it. Leslie, I saw your hand up. Do you want to add something, or is it?
No, that was for the
yeah
for the former one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this again from the panelists. Thank you for a very informative discussion and presentation today. I think we ended up regions with a lot of information and also resources for future applications. I think that we run out of time for further questions. I would like to set the floor for Fulvio for the final remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Majid. I appreciate all your insights and shared resources, and I encourage the community of practice to have a look at the resources shared by our colleagues from P2R, MIP4ADAPT, Naturans, and CLIMAAX, and how this have a complementary role in building your financeable, bankable climate adaptation plans. So we will make sure to send over to you all these resources with the agreement with all our speakers. And I want just to conclude, as usual, by giving a brief update on the state of the community of practice and upcoming initiatives. So here we are. So before we close, we want to invite you to mark your calendars for our next event, because on June 10 and 11, the CLIMAAX Consortium will gather in Barcelona for a dedicated workshop with supported regions. And in this in-person event, we will bring together regional representatives, implementing institutions, and toolbox developers for 2 days of exchange and collaboration. So for this reason, and given the strong interest many of you expressed in the community of practice for session focused on practical application of the CLIMAAX framework and toolbox on specific hazards, we will not hold our regular COP meeting at the end of the month, but instead we are excited to live stream the full day workshop on June 11. So throughout the day, a series of roundtable discussion will spotlight success stories from CLIMAAX regions implementing climate risk assessment using our methodological framework. And the discussion will dive into the hands-on experiences with both the framework and the risk workflows, highlighting both challenges and area for improvement. So each session will be followed by open Q&A with the audience, and for those unable to attend live, we will also release a premiere video summarizing the key highlights from the day. So stay tuned, because we will share more information and the link for joining remotely, and we are sharing with you these links in the chat for staying up to date. Also, I wanted to mention that we want to share an update on what's next for the CLIMAAX community of practice. As anticipated, we gathered very recently your feedback to help shape the future of these activities, and so to ensure that this reflects your needs and interests. And we have taken that input and are now working on a refreshed lineup of events and resources. So our next milestone, as anticipated, is the live streamed event on June 11 and the highlight video from the event, making the content accessible to the wider community. But looking ahead, we will return after the summer break with a brand new format also for COP meetings, focusing on specific hazards and practical use of the CLIMAAX framework and toolbox, bringing together regions, workflow developers, and practitioners tackling challenges and sharing lessons learned, with both the risk assessment experiences, but also the adaptation planning and strategies. So making the whole cycle for adaptation available to you in the sense of making new knowledge exchanges and understanding how the different steps could be carried out. So stay tuned, there is much more to come, and we are very excited to continue shaping this community together with you. With that being said, final message, I want again to reiterate the thanks to our colleagues and friends from P2R, Naturans, MIP4Adapt, and of course our colleagues in CLIMAAX for their nice contribution on the topic of mobilizing finance. But before closing, a final message on how to stay engaged with the COP. Of course, as you know, you can join our LinkedIn group. We will put all the links into the chat, and you are more than welcome also to participate to our survey for helping us understanding how to further support regions in Europe and refining or updating our resources. And finally, you can directly subscribe to our community of practice via the CLIMAAX website. Under participate section, there is a COP section to receive further communication and updates. So that's it. Thank you again for attending this event. Thanks again to all our speakers for their nice collaboration. We encourage you to look at the resources and also to apply for the P2R open call for regions, as you can get really nice support, not only in economic terms, but in guidance, capacity buildings, and tools that can further strengthen your long-term strategy and resilience. So that's it. Thank you again, and see you next time.